Welcome to our weekly Timeless Principles for Extraordinary Living with Dr. Alex. Dr. Alex believes that you were born for extraordinary exploits, to be an exhibition of divine abundance. Today's session, as all others, will inspire you to experience extraordinary living. Join Dr. Alex now.
Wow. Allow me to welcome you to Module 2, Part 3 of the Kingdom Priority of Management. The Kingdom Priority of Management. In this Module 2, we are dealing with the basics of management. I'm so excited. I'm so joyful that we could have this opportunity together, that we could have an opportunity for sharing you on this subject. And I'm so happy that you have connected. Welcome again. Welcome. Thank you to those who shared with me on their definition of management. Well, maybe I should have decided to share with you some of those definitions, but thank you so much for responding to what I asked you to do in Module 2, Part 2. I want us to do the motto again. Our motto for this series is, if you can say this after me, what I manage, it improves, it grows, it increases. Try it again. What I manage, it improves, it grows, it increases. The second motto that we said we'll always say in this series, management was the primary motivation for my creation beyond the religious activities I like so much. I know when we make that second one, all of us religious people cringe a little bit and feel, man, Dr. Alex, why do you say such a thing? Well, in this Part 3, I now begin to enter the task of management, or what we call the core management tasks. In the last Part 2, I focused on definitions. But what is our central task? The central text. Let's start with the text again. It's important that we always do the text. One day, after a friend of mine in another country was listening to one of my Tuesday morning reflections, then she sent a message, hey, I joined the reflection late. What was the verse again? Can you tell me what the verse was? Then I realized that you always must have the verse because our kingdom citizens always want to have the verse. So our text for this management, basics of management, is from the wisest man that lived, second only to Christ. And the wisest man that lived, second only to Christ, says in Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent the plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance and advantage. I love that. I just love that. The plans of the diligent lead surely to abundance and advantage. Then it says, but everyone who acts in haste comes surely to poverty. What if we could just preach a little bit, I like the two words, surely. Now, what this text is saying to me in the context of what we're teaching, both plans and haste have outcomes. Plans have outcomes. Haste have outcomes. Both plans and haste are leaders. They lead you somewhere. It's just that where they lead you is different. It says, the plans lead us surely to abundance. Again on my right hand, abundance. Then haste lead us surely to poverty. And hence I make the conclusion, abundance is a consequence. Poverty is a consequence. If I have abundance in my life, it means I have done what leads to abundance. If I have poverty in my life, it means I have done what leads to poverty. So both abundance and poverty are outcomes. They are outcomes of how we do what we do. And I summarize how we do what we do with a simple word: management. They are both outcomes of management. And again, I challenge Africa. I challenge us Africans. Let us place greater focus on management. For a long time, we've placed it just on leadership, but let's place it on management. We move from what you did in part 2, which was definitions. And remember my definition that I gave you in part 2. My inspirational definition is that management is the critical path to human success, human prosperity, and extraordinary living. A manager was Elohim's primary motivation for creating the human, more than the religious activities we so much like. Okay, now, what is the task of a manager? The core management task. So we've defined management: the scholarly way, the inspirational way, the motivational way, your way. Now, as I said earlier, when it comes to the definitions, it's behavioral science. So in behavioral science, everybody defines things a certain way. But what we agree about, I love this, is the core management task. Even though we may have all various definitions, but when we say this is what management task is about, at least there's some agreement. Now, this has been evolving, at least over the last 25 years I've been involved in management. When I began, like I shared with you earlier, I began by studying a diploma in business management. It was very fascinating. With all the PhD, I was sitting there in the class with all these kids who had never even seen a master's degree, a PhD, and I was studying with them management. And the lecturers would ask me, why do you do a diploma? I said, I need to get the terminology first right. I don't want to start with MBAs. I'll get there. I just need the terminology right. So in those early days, I promise you, the definition we were given of the core management task was what I summarize as PI. You can see it there on the screen. I've put the picture there on the screen for you. That's the definition we were given. And it simply said, the core management tasks are 3: planning, implementation, and evaluation. Now, I came from physics and mathematics, so I simply called it PI. PI. Pi 314, how I wish I could calculate pi. Pi. So I kept it, and it remained in my head. So my earlier days, when you said to me, what is management? I simply said, what is the task, the core task of management? Remember, we explained last time the difference with leadership. So leadership is defining the right thing to be done, and management is taking what needs to be done and get on with the work of doing it effectually, which is effective and efficient. So how does a manager do that? The first core task of a manager is planning. Planning. If I was speaking to my friends in church, I would say this after me: planning. So the idea here is that there are core tasks. The first one is planning. Then from planning, you move to implementation. That is the management task. From implementation, you move to evaluation. That's the management task. When these 3 tasks are not all done, the management task is incomplete. PI. Planning, implementation, and evaluation. Well, then later in my study, I came to MBA. Now, this had evolved from PI. PI, planning, implementation, and evaluation. It had evolved. I've put it on the screen for you. What was the next evolution of the management task? It's POLK. POLK. Well, at least there was still the P. POLK simply summarizes these 4 tasks: planning, organizing, leading, and control. Planning, so planning was still there, but the evolution of the management task had introduced the word organizing and introduced the word leading and then the word control. Now, I'm not going to engage what changed and what didn't change yet because we are learning here. We're going to follow one model. Then I left school, spent many years in management using either PI or POLK, but now POLK was more used. Then in the last few years, management literature has evolved again. Now they say the core management tasks are 5. Remember, I started with 3. PI, planning, implementation, and evaluation, as simple as that. Then it evolved to POLK, planning, organizing, leading, and control. Please understand, not leadership, leading. Leading is a management task. It's not leadership, it's leading. Okay. Then it evolved. I've put it on the screen for you so that you can see what it evolved to. Then the modern management task is 5 core tasks of a manager. Planning, planning is still there. Organizing, organizing is still there. Leading, leading is still there. Then they introduce a new one, staffing. And then control. So the 4 were still there from POLK, planning, organizing, leading, and control, but they introduced a new term, a new step called staffing. Well, friends, for this series, we are not trying to write a thesis here. We're trying to get to do some work. For this series, we will use POLK. The 4 management tasks is POLK. I can argue why with you staffing for me is included in organizing and leading. So I wouldn't put it on the side. But obviously, you know what scholars like. They need to get some papers published. They need to get, some research funds. So they need to keep tweaking things around. But let's just stick with what we can do, what we can use. So what are the 4 the 4 core management tasks? The first management task is planning. Planning. If you are a manager, one of your core tasks is planning. Don't worry the definition of management. Now let's just focus on what to do. Planning. The second management task is organizing. The task of a manager is organizing. I will deal with each of these. The third management task is leading. Leading is a management task, not leadership. I don't know if the Lord will want me to teach about leadership, but that's not in my spirit at the moment. There is enough leadership literature. Everybody writes on that. So let's leave that. But we're talking here leading, not leadership. Then the 4th management task is control. Guess what? I decided to engage each of these tasks, but begin with, what do you think I begin with? I begin with control. POLK, planning, organizing, leading, and control. And by his favor, I begin with control. I know you would have said, Dr. Alex, start with planning. There's a reason why I started control, you'll see, because in many organizations, planning gets done, let alone that it's often poor planning. but planning gets done. Even in the organizations I lead, we have plans, annual, 3-yearly, all the beautiful things. In fact, my way of doing things is that you do things in cycles of 3 years, and each year has its own annual plan, and each of those annual plans lead to the 3-year plan. When I get to planning, I'll show you that in a little bit more details. But I felt very strongly with starting with what is missing a lot in management. I'm challenged personally on this particular one, control, because that's what's missing even in our own lives. I can argue with you. In organizations I've led, we have plans, and we look at them the next time when we have to do plans again. And then say, oh, by the way, we had plans last year. Come on, guys, let's see. And only then we look at the plans. Because this important task of management called control, we miss. In my way of leadership, I don't use the word control. I use the word monitoring and evaluation. The task, the management task of control is basically about the following: ensuring that things get to where you wanted them to go. So in the planning, you are defining where things have to go this year. That's why it's easier to get plans, because you're simply writing there. If it's a profit organization, we want to increase our profit by 20%. If it's an organization like a church or whatever, we want to increase our membership by X. So the planning tells you where we want to go, even though I'm not on planning yet. And it's much easier to write things down. I mean, you write things down. But the control part, the management task of control or monitoring and evaluation, deals with the question or with the concept: let's ensure that things get to where we wanted them to go. So the control task of management has 3 elements. The first element is to develop performance standards. Performance standards. That's the first element of control. The second element is to measure the performance regularly against the performance standards, which is often called performance assessments. So the task of management called control does not only develop the performance standards, but it also says we will then monitor, assess performance as we go to see how it does against the standard. Then the third task of the management task called control is improvements and corrections in line with the performance standards and plans. So let's look back and think about this, because it's important. In this thing called POLC, planning, organizing, leading, and control, I'm starting with control because that's what we miss a lot. I miss it in my family, we miss it in organizations, we miss it everywhere. This whole concept, we are happy to have plans, we're carrying it plans, but actually, do we ensure that things get to where we want them to go? How do we do that? By 3 things: developing performance standards. What's a performance standard? It's simply something that answers the question, how will we know we are performing according to expectations? So don't think it's a complicated thing. So how will we know we're performing according to expectations? For example, if you have a plan to drive from one city to the next city, what I did with my kids, we no longer drive that much now. Everybody's old and they've got their own kids. So when they were still youngish and we used to drive, maybe from Pretoria to Cape Town, we would sit down with the map and we identify areas where we will stop for breakfast, for lunch, for dinner. And those places served as our monitoring and evaluation. because we would say we should be in Bloemfontein at 7 a.m. for our breakfast. So that's a performance standard. So as I was driving, they would always start early, 3 in the morning. They are all sleeping, 4 in the morning. They are all sleeping in the car. And I'm driving. I've got my clock here. And I am using what we identified. We will talk about it later on. That thing is called milestones. But let's not get all the jargon in here. So I would then wake them up 5 to 7. Usually I had to perform very well. I would arrive there maybe 15 minutes earlier. Remember when they were sleeping, I could drive any speed and everybody's still sleeping. No one is at the road with cameras. Okay, now I'm not saying you should do that. I was younger. Now I'm older. I do things right. So we would get there earlier. Then I would then at 1:45 wake everybody up. And Dad, why are you waking us up? They say, we've arrived at milestone 1. Here is my performance assessment. We arrived 15 minutes earlier. So we've got 15 minutes more to add to the time we'd allocated for breakfast. That's the concept of performance standard, is how will we know we are performing according to expectations? But you then have to monitor and evaluate and improve and corrections. Family, I want to challenge us on this first task of management. Begin this as little as you can. There is no point of starting the year excited, setting up the goals, dancing, and whatever we do. We Africans, we dance for everything. The young baby is born, we dance. Old man dies, we dance. Whatever happens, we just dance. Now, we begin the year with all the dancing, and write down all these beautiful goals. This year, I was teaching our team 3 to Thrive. I'll get to it when I get to plans. And now you have those 3 to Thrive. My card is not here. Okay, I changed before I started. It's in my other shirt. So I have my card. I keep looking at those 3 to Thrive. But the point is, if we do not have monitoring and evaluation, when the year ends, we won't be able to know whether we've performed. I want to show you this management task of monitoring and evaluation by going back to the case studies. When I started this series, The Kingdom Priority of Management, I gave you 2 case studies, and I'll use them right through the series, one way or the other. The second case study was found in Matthew 25. In that case study, we had an owner who gave to his team bags of gold, bags of money. And the owner went away for a long time. And the team, each member of the team was expected to manage what the owner had given them. I challenge all of us religious people. Our owner has given us something, and he's expecting us to manage what we've been given. Manage what we've been given. Now, I want to go there and talk about the lazy manager. We found out of the 3 that one of them was then defined as the worthless, lazy, wicked manager. I want to go to 24, verse 24, when the manager has been called by the owner to account. Matthew 25, 24. He comes in front of the owner and listen to what it says. Then the man, actually, let me use this one. Okay, now I might take long by opening things that I didn't plan to open. Ooh, help me here. Relax with me a little bit. I just think I must use this one. Matthew 25, 24, let's see what it says. Then it says, then the man who had received 1 talent. So NIV used the word 1 talent. The version I used is, let me use the one I used. Let's leave NIV. It's a nice one, but let's use the one I used. Then the man who had received 1 bag of gold came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. Wow! Here's what I want you to see. This lazy manager actually knew the performance standard of the master. Look at how it says. He says, I knew. Which means, when you gave me the bag of money, the bag of gold, I was very clear about your expectations. Let's think about the words he puts here. The expectations was that I will improve, I will grow, I will increase what you gave me. He knew that. May I just throw to us religious friends here? The master who gave you whatever talent you have, he has an expectation. He expects improvement, he expects growth, he expects increase. You see, if the management task called control is not done, what will happen in your life, in your organization, is that your management will be ineffective. That's why this task called monitoring and evaluation, remember I use monitoring and evaluation for control, is so critical. It's so critical. This task demands on us that we will do performance assessment. What this particular case study was about, we will see that it's a performance assessment. The man knew that the expectation was growth. And then the man did not do his task. Yet he knew the expectation. It is for that reason that when the manager comes, he says, you are worthless. Why are you worthless? You were given a resource. You knew the expectation, but you still sat on the resource. I wonder how many of you listening to me, when the day for monitoring and evaluation comes, I wonder how many will be found to have been lazy. I won't use the other words. I'll just use the lazy one. The other one's a bit strong. You see, family, friends, extraordinary people, I think religion has blinded us so much that we fail to see in our own constitution that management is right across from the beginning. Management is right across this book. This is our constitution. Those of us who believe in the Christ, this is our constitution. Management is right. As a matter of fact, we were supposed to be the best at management because it's right in the book. You say, Dr. Alex, show me. Well, let's go back to the beginning. Genesis chapter 1. Let's read the story. The story of creation. The narrative of creation. I won't engage the whole of it today. I'll come to parts of it when I come to planning. In the narrative of creation, verse 31, Genesis 1:31, read with me in the NLT. It says, then God looked over all he had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed, and morning came. It marked the sixth day. Wow. Let's see carefully what it's saying. So, he had a plan in the beginning of creation. Now he has come to this point in creation. Now he wants to determine for himself, how have I performed? In other words, Elohim did a performance assessment on himself. It says, he looked over all that he had made. He took all that he had made, he put it across, and he looked, okay, how did that go? How did that go? How did that go? And then it says, when he looked over, the assessment report, the performance assessment report said, very good. Very good. That was the performance assessment report. I need you to note here, because some of you don't notice something in the story of creation. He did not rest until he had done performance assessment. He did not say, okay, I've been working, I'm tired, I'm going to sleep. No, he did not rest until he had done performance assessment. When the performance assessment report said, very good, in Genesis chapter 2, say, then God rested. Then God rested from his work. So Genesis 2 verse 2 to 3, you'll read it. He only rested, watch carefully, when the performance assessment of his work gave the answer, very good. And then he said, now I can rest. So I challenge you to see that really, the management task is throughout the scripture. You said, Dr. well, that's just Genesis. Well, let me take you to the end of the book. Revelations 20. When you go to Revelations 20, remember again, we're not trying to preach here. We're just bringing you this extraordinary expert. In Revelation 20, then it says, verse 12, then I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and books were opened. Another book was opened, which is the book of life. The dead were judged according to what they had done, as recorded in the book. So this whole thing of accounting is right through the book. So in the beginning, he works, and then he pauses, he does evaluation. He does monitoring, he does control. Then he launches the world. Then it says at the end of everything, he will again call now everybody. And then he goes back to the books and say, hey, you are given a talent. What did you do to the talent? Wow, you were given these abilities. What did you do? So I'm just showing you that the task of management called control is right to the book. To the point that if you were to flip to 1 Corinthians 3, verse 12, I know I'm combining two things here. It says, if I start from verse 10, by the grace God has given me, I laid foundation as an expert builder, and someone else is building on it. But each one should be careful how they build, for no one can lay another foundation. Verse 12. If a man builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, his work will be tested. So when I finish my work, it will be tested. What I'm doing with you today will be tested. I will have to come carrying my work, and it will be tested. Even though this is more about the quality of the work, it will be tested. So the entire idea of management is in fact in our constitution. And I've dealt today with a management task called control. I want to challenge you. Don't just be excited with planning, but be also excited with monitoring and evaluation. Performance standard, measuring the performance, doing improvements and corrections. Why should God give you more, yet you don't manage what you have now? Think with me. Why should God give you more, yet you don't manage what you do now? You know, one of our religious activity, we call it prayer. Every week, every day, we pray. And most of the time, in our prayer, is ask. We wanting God to give us more. But we don't even monitor whether we have what we asked last week, what we asked last year, what we asked 10 years ago. Because this idea of management doesn't drive us. We are driven by religiosity. We are driven by a religious activity. And that's all we do. So why should Elohim give you more, yet you don't manage what you have now? How will you improve your performance if you don't do the task of control, monitoring, and evaluation? And this is the toughest thing that most people run away from. Any organization I've been a leader in, during the time of performance assessment, my goodness, it becomes sour throughout the organization. Why shouldn't you be excited? When I was still in corporate and I was still being assessed and monitored, I always wanted the fives. You know, they were scoring in 1 to 5. I would go in with my report, sit in front of my manager, and I knew I must get the fives. I've always had this attitude to compete with the top, not with people. I even when I was still a student in many years ago, they would ask me at university, and I said, no, I'm competing with 100%. I don't really care who gets what. I care that I get 100. If the whole class gets 100, that's beautiful. But I compete with the top mark. So I did the same in corporate. I would just say, you tell me, manager, why I shouldn't get all fives in all my performance. It is my strong belief that in the entire fabric of the creation, in the entire fabric of the kingdom, management is at core. And the task of monitoring and control is what either makes or breaks the management process. Commit to management. We will continue in part 4. I'm excited that you have held on with me till this far. Join me again next week as we engage part 4.
Thank you for connecting with us on Extraordinary Exploits with Dr. Alex. We value your connection. Join us every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. Central African Time. And remember to invite others. Experience extraordinary living.